Lorna, you can put the stop screen back and yeah, there you go. So welcome everyone. My name is Unmesh Sheth. Today, as part of the Miller Center for Social Entrepreneurship series, this is a very second part of the workshop. The first part of the workshop, as many of you attended, focused on how to design the right impact strategy. And impact strategy is really very unique in a way that we believe the best way to understand the impact is through design, an effective theory change-based approach, but very effective approach called impact experiment, basically focusing on a core outcome and really go through the journey to design who the key stakeholders are, identifying the most few important outcomes, and then rest of theory change. That journey allows you to design the right process. And as we mentioned last time, that we often see organizations who collect the data that simply don't align with the impact strategy. And the purpose of this workshop is to really give you a very smooth and clear guidelines. Now that you created impact strategy, what do you do next? Lauren, I will also share we also invited people to share their impact strategy. And Lauren has been giving one-on-one feedback to you. And we will continue to introduce and continue to advance this discussion in the Slack channel as well. So to get started, I would like to invite Jeff Pilsek from Miller Center for Social Entrepreneurship. Jeff, welcome.
Thanks, Umesh, and welcome everybody to this second webinar in our data impact series. Miller Center has been working with Sopact for quite a while, and actually they're one of our favorite partners. They are supporting a lot of the work that we do with the entrepreneurs we work with in helping them develop their own impact journeys. And they're also helping Miller Center with our own impact journey, which has been a really helpful partner to have in this. For those who don't know Miller Center, let me just tell you a little bit about us. For 25 years, Miller Center has been leading the social enterprise movement, or at the forefront of the movement. We have a particular emphasis on climate resilience and women's economic empowerment. And we accelerate social entrepreneurship to end global poverty and protect the planet. And that's just sort of how we think about what our mission is and how we make impact in the world. And it's really through the social enterprises we're working with, and particularly those with a focus on climate resilience and women's economic empowerment. Miller Center is located in Santa Clara University in Santa Clara, California, in the heart of Silicon Valley. We've served over 1,300 social enterprises and have engaged over 200 students through hands-on learning opportunities, working together with the social enterprises in our network. We've also created a network of over 300 business leaders from around the world, from within Silicon Valley, who participate as mentors in our program and are really our secret to supporting the enterprises that we work with. And that's really all I have to say. I'll hand it back over to Umesh, and I think this is going to be a wonderful webinar, and thanks for coming.
Thank you, Jeff. And we are also very excited with our partnership with the Miller Center. What we are doing is something very unique in a way that benefits everyone in the world who are interested in advancing their impact management journey altogether. As part of our journey, we would like to today focus on the very actionable processes on how to define your data strategy. So assuming that you have understood what the impact strategy is, and Lauren, I will do some refresher, we'll go straight into the very practical guide. Now, just like impact strategies requires a very effective approach, data strategies is even more complex sometimes, because everyone's data collection requirements are quite unique from each other. And in fact, we see many organizations simply trip up with the data collection, data management aspect of it. as when there are many choices, you need to be very careful about what path you take in managing data altogether. If you haven't started on a data journey, this is a great point to focus on that one. And if you have, it's a good time to evaluate how to rethink your data strategy altogether. If you have any questions, obviously, if you want guidance on your solutions, you can always reach out to Sopact team after the call, or go to our website and book the call altogether. So with that, I'd like to invite Lorena to present the rest of the workshop.
Thanks, Unmesh, and welcome everyone. As Unmesh mentioned, we went through some exercise last time, and I just want to give an overview of what that looked like before we start with the topics for today. These are some of the topics that we will review in this session. Let me just go to the next slide. Yeah, so this is our agenda for today. We just want to do a quick recap initially. Then we're going to talk about designing survey questions. Whoever joined last time, you remember that we left it where we define all of the sources of data, and some of that data could come from a survey, but we didn't go into detail on that part. So today we will do that. Then we have some information about how to pick the right tool. Some of you might already be using some tools to collect different types of data, operational or demographics or application for a specific program, things like that. So we just want to talk about if you don't have a system yet, what you should be aware of before picking one, so that you don't have your data locked down and you can use it. And also, if you already have a system, just check if the way you are, exporting that data and all of that is also usable. So that's what that topic is about. And then we will just give a few best practices for data analysis, which is connected to the data collection. You will see some of the same points repeating, because the way we collect the data is how easy or difficult it would be for us to then analyze it and slice it in different ways, disaggregate by certain things like location or demographic information like gender. So all of it is connected. And what we want is for this session to be about how you make sure to collect data in the systems that are more convenient for you, for your use case, your organization, your resources, and then how you make sure that that data will be useful after that. So with that, I'm gonna first jump into the recap. So last time we discussed about this spreadsheet. We call it our IMM toolkit, Impact Measurement and Management Toolkit. And we even shared it with some people. If you didn't receive it or you don't have access yet, you can just ask for access and you can still try to use it, just work on it. The previous session is recorded, it's on YouTube, and you can go through it to see how to use this toolkit. But the main idea is to document your projects. We recommend that you start with one project or one program. If you're doing this for the first time, that you document your stakeholders. This is to make sure we understand who we are serving and what kind of data we will need to collect, if we have access to our stakeholders to collect that sort of data, etc. This tab is about the outcomes, and my example is very very rough, very small, but ideally you should try to have only 2 or 3 outcomes if you're collecting data for the first time. That's what we call the impact experiment. If you try to go too big, it will be difficult to collect all that data and manage it. So we recommend 2, maximum 3 outcomes for the first time. And ideally, these outcomes should be related to the same stakeholder, because again, from each stakeholder, we will collect different types of data, and also their outcomes are different. Even if the program is the same, they all receive different benefits from it. So try to keep it simple. Then we talked about the theory of change, some very basic structure that you can use to create your theory of change for the first time. And here we have some examples of things that might be difficult to measure, that might be outside of your scope. So again, it's all about keeping it to what you can actually measure, the kind of data that you can actually collect, so you don't overcomplicate things. And the last thing we did was talk about the metrics, how we can take some of the IRIS metrics or SDG metrics, some of the sources that are already out there, and maybe modify that to match our context, and use that as an example of what we could be collecting. Some of them are going to be very custom to our context, our use case, and that's okay. And the most important part of this is we are mapping everything to the theory of change. So whatever we did in the previous tab, it doesn't go to waste. We are here mapping our outputs, outcomes, whatever I need to track. I want to make sure that the metrics are associated to those outcomes and outputs. I also want to make sure that they are associated, or they are mapped to the 5 dimensions of impact, which is who are the stakeholders, what is changing, how much is changing, the risk and the contribution of my organization towards that change. We also talked about making sure I understand what are the relevant, or I document the relevant data points for each of these metrics, so I know exactly what kind of data I need to collect. And finally, the source of that data. Here is where we define this, for example, is more about the general information of my stakeholders and their demographics. So this most likely will come from a CRM. And in your case, it might be different. You might have an application, you might have a Google Sheet. It could be anything. So this is for you to think where that information is. And if you don't have it yet, you don't collect it yet, then we can use that information from today's webinar, which is what kind of tools you can use for all these different types of data. Now, whenever we talk about survey data, we want to do a similar mapping that we did with the metrics. This mapping will happen in the next tab. We received around 10 toolkits from people who actually went through the process and the exercise and worked on it. Really good job documenting all of these things. We provided some feedback, and some of you didn't get to this point, some of you actually did, and it was also very well done. So I just wanted to give a shout out to those people who shared it with us. If you want to share your theory of change, you were not there in the first session, you can still do it. Just ask for the document, we'll give you a copy. You can just download that copy and create your own copy and send that information to us. So going back to this survey. When we did this mapping, we made sure that whatever outcomes and outputs I defined in my theory of change, I was defining a metric for that. We will do the same thing here. Whatever metric is associated to a survey, I'll just add it here so that I'm able to think of the questions. What kind of questions will give me this kind of information? And here we have some rules to follow. Well, they are not rules, like they are not hard rules, but there were some recommendations to follow to make this easier. First, always make sure that you're mapping questions to a metric. Otherwise, you will end up with some questions that might not give you the information that you need to measure this. Second is try to, although you have to make sure that they map to the metric, try to keep your survey as short as possible. We have seen that beyond 20 questions, people usually don't respond. Even 10, 15 maximum would be the ideal, because otherwise people get disengaged and we get a lower response rate. So let's try to keep it as short as possible. If there's any other way I can get this data, for example, if I already have the demographics in the application or the CRM, there is no need for me to ask this again in the survey. There are just some tricks that we can follow to make sure that we can map that data, and I will talk about that. But let's not ask the same things over and over again, so we can save some time for people and they feel more compelled to participate. Let's have a good mix of qualitative and quantitative questions. And some qualitative questions could even be not completely open text, because as you know, open text is very difficult to analyze. Let's try to keep some options even for some qualitative questions. You have been working with your stakeholders for some time. You might know what are the things that they will most likely respond, or the kind of issues that they usually face. So you can try to have some structured responses, and then maybe just have an other option where they can add anything additional. And if you get many responses in that other that are very similar, you can add that as an option next time around in your survey. So try to keep it structured. Let me go back here to my presentation where I have some other recommendations. So we talked about these first three. As for a unique ID, so a unique ID could be, for example, the email address, could be some, I don't know, social security number. If you are able to collect that, I understand that you might not, or any, I don't know, employee number, whatever. It's going to be consistent, that the stakeholder knows. If you ask for email address, for example, that they will every time know what their email address is, or if they have a number, that they will know that number. So if you ask in the application, for example, they will give you that information. And then if you ask in the survey, they will give you the same information. And then if they take a training in your learning management system, they will know that information. So every time you take them through a process of collecting some information, they will provide that unique number, unique ID, and that will allow you to map the data. That's how you avoid asking, for example, the demographics again in the survey, so you can have the information complete. If you use this unique ID, then you can map it through different systems or different surveys, maybe the pre and the post, and the one that you will collect 6 months from now. You always try to have some demographic information. As we reviewed last time, who is a very important part of demonstrating impact, who are the stakeholders. It allows us to show why we are focusing on those communities, on those stakeholders, why they need that support, what's their context, what's their situation. So try to collect always data associated with that will allow you to demonstrate that. And include questions that will help you disaggregate data. So sometimes we collect some information in the survey, but then at the end we say, oh, it would be great if I could disaggregate this by community, but I didn't collect that. It's not part of any of my data. So make sure that you think through how exactly you would like to see the data at the end, how it would be useful for you to demonstrate the impact or to show to your funders or your board or your internal team, how you would want to slice that data and make sure that you have that information somewhere in your different systems that you will use to collect the data. If you have, if you provide a service or a product, for example, in the case of social entrepreneurs or even consultants who are providing impact management services to their clients, make sure to include a Net Promoter Score question. This one is very useful, very well accepted in the business sector. So it will speak to funders and other external stakeholders. And also, obviously, it gives you a good information about what your stakeholders think of your product or service. And yeah, we were talking about this. Keep your survey as short as you can. So that's about collecting data with survey. But again, we have different types of information that we will want to collect. And for each of them, the tool that we need to use is going to be different. So in the case of demographic data, if you need to collect this kind of data, you can use a CRM kind of system. And here, you have to consider if your workflow will be complex. For example, if you need to have like different stages for, let's say, some applicant, if you need to maybe send some documents at certain points of the process, if you need, your team needs to approve certain steps before your stakeholders can go to the next phase. All of those things, you would have to find a more robust system like Salesforce or HubSpot. These systems allow you to have all of these workflows, and also they allow you to export that data or connect to other systems later to analyze that information or pull that information and analyze it along with other things that you collect. So these are very, very robust, and we know for sure that you can connect them to pretty much anything. If there is no need for those workflows, if you basically just need to keep some sort of list of people, and maybe you just have to say like approve or not approve, and that's it, that's all you have to do. And if they are approved, then they go to the next step where they go through the program and maybe some training, etc. But that will happen in a separate place, in a separate system. Then you can use, you know, any of this type of systems. I am dividing them into two because in the case of, for example, Airtable, AppSheet, which is a no-code app, and other apps like that, most likely will be there will be an option to export this as a CSV or as an Excel. Whatever information you collect here, you will be able to export very easily. So these are good options because it will allow you to analyze the information. Just be aware that, for example, in the case of low-code, no-code apps, these have some limitations precisely because you don't have to know any coding to create that app. You just have to define some basic structure of what the sections are and what are the 2 or 3 actions within your app. It has some limitations in terms of design, in terms of even, you know, the buttons that you can use or not use. So just check what kind of functionalities are available before you use any of this. In the case of AppSheet, for example, you just create your structure in a Google Sheet, and that reflects on your app. Whatever is collected on the app using mobile phone or using the browser, it comes to that that same Google Sheet. So it already creates a structure of a table that you can then use to analyze information. So it's useful, but again, just be aware that these have some limitations. They're not as robust as this. But the cost is also obviously much lower. So you might want to consider that. In the case of these two, like a loan management system or some event registration tool, you would have to check if they have open APIs. This is going to be important. Otherwise, again, if they don't, you need to make sure that at least you can export the data as a CSV or as an Excel, the way you would do with these other tools. If you cannot do any of these two, just stay away from that tool. I know that sometimes we use custom made tools. We even like come up with our own internal structure for this. But even if you do that, just make sure that at some point you build the ability to export that data. Otherwise, it's going to be locked and it's going to be unusable. And that's when we end up collecting exactly the same data in another system or in the survey, for example. If you can export, if you have open APIs, you can connect it to the dashboard that you decide. We also have, in some cases, operational data. So this is more about, I don't know, for example, some information about the sales, if you are providing again a product or a service, if you have some financial information that you want to compare, for example, the investment in certain project versus the outcome, the social outcome. If you have some maybe like transactions that happen in your website, maybe you're providing some training on your website, the transactions that go on, maybe you want to use some of that information. Then in that case, again, just be aware of the kind of complexity that you have. If there is a workflow involved, try to use some robust systems like Salesforce. If it's not complex, you can use either Google Sheets or Airtable. Again, Airtable is a really, really good tool, and the cost is not very high. With operational data, you have to think if you really, really need to connect it to your impact. Like I said, in some cases, you want to extract the investment in something and compare it to the outcome, to the social outcome. In that case, it makes sense, but not always it makes sense to bring that information. So if this operational data connects to your metrics, that's why it is so important to define that column of source of data when I create my metrics. If there is a metric that actually connects to anything here, then we try to pull it. Otherwise, there's no need. Just for the sake of having data, it might not be useful. You might want to still analyze it separately, more for internal purposes, just to make sure that everything is on track in your business. That's fine, but then it doesn't necessarily have to be part of your impact dashboard. We have stakeholder data. So that's the kind of data that we collect, for example, with asking questions, the kind of questions that I was showing before. We didn't really went through that in detail, but I'm going to actually show that now. So these are the kind of questions we want to ask there. For example, do you have any other source of income? If yes, please select which one. What is your total monthly income approximately? So this might be, it's up to you to decide what kind of questions you can ask. I understand that in some cases, for some of our customers, these questions are too sensitive, but you can decide what you can ask, your stakeholders better. But these are the kind of questions I'm talking about here when I say stakeholder data. Things that I would not be able to understand if I don't ask them directly. I will not have this information in any other system. So in this case, the main thing to consider is if you will have access to internet connection or not. I know that many of our clients and many organizations that come to us for the first time, they collect data on paper. But the problem is that once you collect data, let's say 100, you have 100 sheets of paper that you collected from a community. Who is going to sit down and type that information into a spreadsheet? That's a lot of work, and especially if you're a social enterprise or a small nonprofit, I'm sure you don't have like the capacity to do that. So that's why we're trying to, from the beginning, have a digital way of doing this. So there is no extra work involved. So that's why here we want to consider if there is internet access to internet or not. If not, there are some good tools like our Sopact survey. It works offline and online. You also have, for example, Kobo Toolbox. This one is free, so that's an advantage. It is more limited in terms of, for example, the design and what functionalities you can have with it. But for a basic survey, it's good enough. You have, for example, Survey CTO. This is also a really good tool. This one, it's paid, so you would have to check for the pricing. If there is access to internet, you might want to consider, again, our survey or SurveyMonkey type forum, Google Forms. Now, there are many more tools, many more survey tools. We know that, but be aware that sometimes a cheaper survey tool might not have that ability to export, or it might not give you, that option unless you pay extra. Or maybe when you export the data, the structure in which the data comes is complex. It doesn't give you, for example, when we ask questions with an option, how satisfied are you? And we have very satisfied, satisfied, and not satisfied. Some tools, survey tools, assign a number to those options. So when you export the data, instead of giving you that satisfied, not satisfied, it gives you 1, 2, and 3. So you end up having to, manually pretty much replace all of the ones for not satisfied. So just check whenever you're selecting a tool, talk to someone and ask them to show you how the data is exported, and make sure that you can export the data with the labels that option is available. Otherwise, it's going to be more work for you to try to clean that information. Also, these tools, because they are well known, they have been around for some time. They tend to have more options to connect to another tool. Again, we're trying to make this process as easy as possible, as automatic as possible within your means. So you can think of connecting directly to some dashboard that will automatically show you the results every time you collect the data. So these tools tend to have more of those options. We have also seen that people collect qualitative feedback. So this one refers to interviews or focus groups, some information more in detail. You have maybe sent out a survey and it had a couple of open-ended questions, but maybe you need to dig deeper, or some response that you got in the survey was interesting. You don't really understand why people are responding that way, or they said that they didn't like your program, or they didn't get anything good out of it. you might want to understand more about it so you can act quickly and change that. In that case, the key thing to ask yourself is if you have to collect this feedback at scale. If not, if you can just talk to 2 or 3 people, you can do recorded interviews. If you do need to understand out of a big group of people what's happening, then you can do a focus group and record it. Now, this one is difficult, right? Any of you who have done this know that after that, what do you do with that information? If there are some resources available, there are some tools like those AI analytics that you can use to process that information. Some of these tools give you the ability to either identify the overall intention of the responses. If people, for example, overall said that they were satisfied or not satisfied, just like 2 or 3 words that gives you as a result. In some cases, it gives you some common topics, things that people mentioned a lot. In some cases, it can give you just like a percentage of people who, out of all of the responses, they said that they were satisfied, for example. You can configure some of the rules, what exactly you want to get out of it, if it's some words, if it's just like the percentage of people who thought this way or who said something similar to this. So that's an option, but again, it depends on if we have the resources to get that. And usually once it has been processed, you can connect it to the dashboard. If not, make sure that you do your manual transcripts, ideally in Excel. Usually we see that people do it in Word documents, and that's definitely easier. And maybe for reporting purposes, you might still have to create some Word document. But even if it's just like copying and pasting, try to keep it also in an Excel spreadsheet. Ideally, attach some date to it, some context, some information, additional information, in a structure that allows you to then potentially analyze it by location, by date, by community name, whatever is important. Any tool, dashboard tool, tends to accept Excel or CSV. I don't know many that would be able to process a Word document. So for sure, you will be able to do more if you have it in this format. Then if we need to evaluate people over time, so this is not a survey. This is not something that I will maybe ask previous to my intervention and then post and then 6 months down the line, or quarterly. Maybe you just have like the same group of farmers you're working with, but you're just collecting 10 questions from them, and quarterly you go and ask them those 10 questions. That's not this case. This case is when people are participating in an event. For example, we have some clients with sports programs where kids come every week and participate in different events. And through those events, they are learning life skills. And we want to evaluate different life skills at different points in that engagement. Maybe the engagement lasts 6 months. And obviously at the beginning, the kids will not know all of the life skills. That's something that we will be building on as time goes by. So in those cases, we might want to use either a case management system, or again, for example, some no-code, low-code apps. Even Airtable could be useful potentially in this one. What is the difference between using a case management system? Again, this one is more robust and it has workflows. So if I need to maybe after evaluating a kid, I have to transfer them to some additional service, something that will support other issues that I see in their behavior, for example. Those workflows can happen right there in the case management system. So I just like click on a button and now it's referred to this other area in the organization, and that person will receive an email and see that, okay, I have now this new kid that was referred to me, and I have to process this kid through these different stages, and all of those stages happen right in the case management system. And whenever I log in and I search for a kid, I can see absolutely everything that has happened to that person throughout the lifetime that they have been working with us. So it's more like it creates more like a personal file of everything that has happened to them, and those workflows are possible. In the case of these, again, there are no workflows, but I will still be able to have a list, a rough list. Maybe if you just have 20 kids, there's no need to have a case management for 20 kids. You can just have a rougher list, and you can still click on each kid and add some evaluation actions in your app. Maybe there are only going to be like 3 or 4 evaluation formats, and that's it. Maybe after, I don't know, a few weeks of those kids being in this program, they will leave and I will receive a new batch of kids. In those cases, you could use this simpler version. In the case of case management system, again, we have to ask whenever we're evaluating a system if they have open APIs. If they do, sometimes we need like an adapter to pull to some dashboards. And here it will probably depend on what kind of dashboard you want to use, what tool you decide to use. So you can ask it for specifically this tool, is there an adapter that I can usually just easily just connect and my data will start pulling. If there is no adapter, stay away from it, because although, yeah, you can potentially connect because it has open APIs, it might be a more complex process of doing it from the database, and some things that might get you into higher cost. And then if there are no open APIs, again, can I export this data easily in a CSV or Excel in a format that is easy to read, that's like a table? If that's the case, then it's fine. If not, again, stay away from it, because your data is going to be locked into this system. Training data is also very common. Training data could be as part of your program, but also internally for your employees. Maybe if you're doing some, let's say, diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings, and that's part of your goals, your ESG goals, let's say, I don't know, there could be like many reasons to have this training going on. In that case, you most likely will use a learning management system. And again, you have to ask yourself if there are open APIs in these LMS. If yes, is there an adapter that I can easily connect to the dashboard tool that I decide to use? If there are no open APIs, can I export to as a CSV or Excel? And if that's the case, I'm good. I'm good to go. We usually don't think about all these things when we are evaluating a system that we want to use. Sometimes we go by the cost, and I understand that that is important, but sometimes it's worth maybe applying for a grant, or talking to your funders, the board, and get them to approve a higher amount, but explaining why it is important that I can export or use that data after. Finally, we know that some especially entrepreneurs sometimes have apps. They build apps. That's the product that they are providing to their stakeholders. Let's say an app to capture farming information. In those cases, usually these organizations build the app internally with their own resources and with their own workflows and whatever they need. If that's the case, you still have to make sure that you can put an extra effort to at least allow for the app to export the data as a CSV or Excel, and in a structure, again, that looks like a table, that it's easy to read. Just test it. Once you export it, if you can easily understand what each column is, and if it doesn't come like in a nested way, then it will be most likely easy to analyze. If you can have an adapter that you can easily connect to any dashboard, that's great. But this definitely, it's going to be an extra cost, especially for an app. So at least, let's make sure that we can export our data. And then, like I said, there are some best practices connected to how we collect the data itself that will help us analyze the data better. Here are some of those best practices, those rules to follow. Always track the date when data is collected. This is very, very important. And again, whether it's in a CRM or a survey or whatever it is, make sure that there is a date associated to that that help us analyze the data over time. To make this work, though, something that I don't think I mentioned here, but it's very important. Try not to change the questions or the structure of your table every time. If you're defining the structure of your application or your questions, your survey questions, we have seen that sometimes people change them slightly every year. Maybe this year they ask for name, and next year they ask for full name. That's just a very rough example, but in some cases of other kinds of questions, it actually matters because we are not able to track that data point over time, especially if you change the options from very satisfied, you delete that option, or you change them to something completely different that might mean the same thing, then you cannot aggregate the data over time. So try to make the least changes once you define your survey questions, your structure of your application. Yes, you can always add new columns, new things that you want to understand from them, especially as you collect data and start learning what is missing. But don't just change the old structure because you don't like how it sounds, or because for like small reasons. That's just going to make it difficult. Again, to avoid spelling issues, use drop downs whenever possible. To show this few next examples, I'm going to move to this. So what happens when I have a spelling issue? These, if you can see, these are like slightly different. And then here, it's pretty much the same, but I just don't have those spaces and the C is not capped. To most dashboard systems, data analysis systems, this is a different option from this. So it's not going to aggregate it properly. It seems small, but it can happen. If you're doing this manually, maybe you will catch it and be able to fix it. But even in a pivot table, it might show as a different row. But again, if we're trying to make this more streamlined and automatic and easier for you to manage, we want to plug it to something that will analyze the data for you, even if it's a simple tool. Then try to keep it consistent. That will that will help you. And to do that, create dropdowns. Whenever it's possible, just create dropdowns. Something else that we have there that in our presentation that's coming is make sure that you don't have merged columns like this, and you don't have this kind of titles and subtitles. Try to avoid that. Again, if you just plug this into some data analysis platform, this will be confusing. It will give an issue. So this is an example of how you can treat this kind of questions. It is not as easy to read like as this is for us, but it will be easier to read for a system that will analyze information.
Lorna, you may want to point out, if you go bottom right, there's an explore button. There's an AI-based approach on this thing. Just go down and you see bottom right, there's a button there. So yeah, there you go. That's an explore, and many people may not be aware of it, but it's a very powerful AI-based data cleanup tool altogether. So you guys might want to also be aware. So this is a very powerful ways to keep your data clean, and that's really handy tool, which really helps you do a lot of things altogether.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Anmesh. Yeah, and let's go back here. Again, we're talking about the unique IDs. We collected it in our different systems. Now use that ID to track results across different systems. It's going to be tricky the first time you do this. We have seen that because sometimes we think that people will, for example, enter always the same email address, and sometimes they also misspell it, or finding the right ID. Sometimes it's not that easy, but if we can manage to do that, it's very useful, because then we can correlate data from all of our different systems. Keep your open-ended questions to the minimum necessary. It's important, but again, it's very difficult to analyze. So just try to ask whenever you really, really need to understand more information about a certain answer, and try not to include many questions in the same one. We have seen sometimes questions like, what are the tools that were more useful to you, and why did you use them, and did these tools fulfill your expectations? So those are 3 different questions, and sometimes it feels like if we ask them, we're just like saving number of questions, which is true, but we're not going to be able to use that data. People will first maybe not give us answer for all 3. They will give a generic answer. And second, how do we separate those 3 things afterwards? So don't save on that. If you're trying to reduce questions, don't save on that. Keep it as 3 separate. And if you can, if you already know what kind of tools you are providing to the participants, make a list of those tools, and maybe only the other 2 stay as open-ended questions, but divide them. So that's very important. We talked about this, avoiding merge cells. Any system where you have to import data, it won't read this merge cells, or even like too much formatting in terms of colors and things like that. Sometimes also cause an issue. And again, just make sure that once you reach this point, like, oh, I want to analyze this data in these different ways, you have all of those data points available in any of your systems as any part of this process. And if not, don't worry this first time around. Remember that this is an iterative process. The first time you collect data, you will learn things about even how you ask the questions, if you got the right answers or not. It's fine to change the questions that didn't get the data that you were expecting. Once you nail it, then just keep it like that for the rest of the data collection. but it is okay to tweak a few things after the first time you collect data, after your initial learnings. And you can always add like, oh, I didn't collect location anywhere. Where is the right place out of this process to add the location in a way that I will not overwhelm the stakeholder in the survey. So that's fair at that point. And this is it. This is pretty much all the content we have for today. Our next session will be more about now that I have the data and I am correlating that information across all of these different systems, what do I do with it? How do I manage it? How do I show it? How do I use it according to my organization's objective? So yeah, making it useful, right? That's why we're going through this whole process. So I hope this was useful as well. And again, if you still want to share your toolkit, feel free to do that. We're still providing feedback to people who share it. And feel free to ask any questions in the Slack channel as well, either to everyone, if you want to get some support from your colleagues in this field, or individually to the Sopact team if you don't want to share it publicly.
Thank you, Lorena. This is amazing new content. I hope you all agree with that. This is a very, very insightful content that has been researched by the team for many years, 7 years, I would say. This is all the cumulative knowledge that you are receiving it, and I hope really you will appreciate that. This is the journey. So, I mean, in case you're wondering, what Lorena is talking about is so that you can essentially create your own data ownership and you can create your own impact management systems. Impact management is very different than monitoring and evaluation. It's about continuous learning and improvement. And we hope that by you attending regularly and Sopact webinars, you are really getting closer to your vision to become owning your data and managing data continuously to make decisions all together. So with that, I would like to invite Jeff to close the session and really give you the summary of the sessions the way he sees, and also the next call to action. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Unmesh, and thanks, Lorena, for a wonderful presentation. This is a little bit of a tease. It's a taste of some of the work that we do in collaboration with Sopact. Before you go, I'm just going to suggest a couple things. First of all, a reminder about the next webinar in the data series is coming up. It will be on September 20th at the same time. You'll probably get a reminder about that, so we encourage you to come back for that next webinar. I'd also like to encourage those who have a social enterprise and are not one of our Miller Center's alumni already, to take a look at our accelerator program. I shared a link in the Slack channel. You can always reach out and find us in other ways as well. You can go to our website at millersocient.org. and you'll find links to our accelerator program. We accept and review applications on a rolling basis. So, I encourage you to take a look, and if you think it's the right program for you, complete an application. Our next cohort will start at the end of January. If you're not sure you meet the eligibility requirements for the accelerator program, we have actually kind of a cool tool on there, which is a social enterprise assessment. It's a moderately brief questionnaire, and it kind of does a quick assessment to see what stage your enterprise is in and see how well you would fit the program that we offer. And then if you're already a Miller Center alumni, we have a separate program outside of the accelerator, which is about a 3-month-long journey deep into your impact metrics and impact dashboard. And this is one of the cool things that we do for our alumni as we continue the journey with them after they graduate from our accelerator program. And this is just one of the offerings that we have there. For those of you who are alumni, log back into the online learning platform and you'll find the IMM program or the Impact Management and Metrics program, and you'll be able to contact us to get signed up for that. So thanks so much, everybody. Wonderful presentation again, Lorena, and we hope to see you back on September 20th.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.